Um, so just, you know, to kind of let you know how this has been. I mentioned this recently, but um, I like to give some sort of guidance in meditation, and some of it is just sort of standard. But sometimes, because we've been meeting like this for so many months and weeks and days, um, sometimes I just kind of go off into more improvisational meditation instruction. Um, so I guess that's a kind of a warning in a way. If you're new to meditation, don't believe everything I say. It's essentially, which is actually good guidance in general.
Mhm.
So yeah, let's sit. So we want to let me just um, I want to situate the body in a way that um, it can be upright and balanced. Actually, I was watching a video of Jonathan Faust the other day. He was talking about having your knees, which below your hips, which I can see I'm not, uh, so that the pelvis is kind of tipped forward. If you can arrange that, the idea is um, I like to think of it as being in alignment and in balance, so that you're not sort of leaning forward or tilted back. You're not stressing. Like when the head particularly tilts forward, it stretches the muscles in the back. And so, if your head starts to tilt, just noticing that, maybe bringing it back up, trying to find a balance point. And you can close your eyes or just lower your gaze. And releasing the shoulders, softening the belly. Letting the jaw be loose so there's no tension in the face. And letting the attention scan through the body, just feeling any prominent sensations, but also feeling the general sense of being in a body, the weight and the energy, the sensations. Mindfulness has an element of curiosity, sometimes being curious about things that we think we already know, like what does my body feel like? When the mind gets quieter, our perception, the way we sort of interpret and experience the senses, particularly the sense of body, actually the sense of touch. This can change significantly with the quieting of the mind. At first, this can actually be disorienting, but then we just get used to this new perspective on our felt experience. Mindfulness of the breath helps us to calm the mind, feeling the inhalation, feeling the exhalation. If we stay with the continual flow of sensation, this can interrupt the flow of thought. And if the mind wanders back into thinking, we can guide it back to the breath. Start again. Notice if there are particular themes or trains of thought that your mind keeps returning to, the habitual patterns, the things that trigger you. These are the ones you might need to give a little more attention to, feel the energy behind them, find a way to let go without an aversive kind of pushing away or suppression. These persistent thoughts and patterns may reveal something more fundamental, our longing, our fears, our resentments. We may have to open to the pain of those things in order to move through them. We tend to turn away or ignore or suppress or rationalize these kinds of habit patterns, mental patterns. But their persistence is calling for our attention. This isn't the need to analyze or try to think them away or judge them, critique them, but rather to feel those underlying needs, not to run from these, these sources of pain, these wounds, to allow them in, to hold them with kindness, hold them with compassion, with forgiveness. All right. All right. Well, I'll just get into step 9. I thought I might talk a little bit about that meditation, but maybe people will ask something later. Sorry if I'm whispering here in my meditation voice. Um, so, yeah, I was saying how this isn't really my favorite thing to go over my book about step 7 because so much of it is really personal. Um, and you can read the stories for yourself. um, but I'll try to get onto some of the more general ideas that that are in this chapter. And so I'm in, as I said, step 9, which for those who don't immediately recall, step 9 says we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So a critical point in the step process, kind of the culmination of the middle steps, step 4, the inventory, and then sort of the whole processing of the inventory, and then coming out the other end of the inventory was like trying to from the internal aspect of the inventory coming to the external part of it, of making amends to the people that we found that we had harmed when we were writing the inventory. We didn't harm them when we were writing it. We harmed them. we realized we harmed them when we were writing it. So I'm on the section called the 500-pound phone. A little joke about how difficult it can be to pick up the telephone to call someone and apologize. And so I tell a story about the amends that I made to my brother Michael. That involved me kind of getting my irresponsible behavior around drugs, got him arrested, and I actually escaped unscathed, at least legally unscathed. And he got in a lot of trouble. So like 15 years later, when I got sober, I realized, oh, did I ever say I was sorry about that? Oops. Michael's a pretty interesting guy. Really one of my favorite people. So anyway, so that I made a couple of notes and some underlining. So on page 193, I say, this might be the first lesson we learn about amends. You can't take it back. You can't fix what you broke. So ultimately, the amends process isn't for the others, but for the self. Even if you pay back the money you owed, you don't totally repair the damage you've done to someone's life. And I think it is a really important lesson on a couple of levels, to yeah, I mean, first of all, there's that obvious kind of Buddhist principle, which is not a Buddhist, well, it's talked about in Buddhism, that, the past is gone, nothing we can do about it. And so the question becomes, what exactly are we doing when we're making amends? And, this is one way of thinking of it. I'm not sure this is 100% of it, but that the amends process isn't for the other, but for the self. I mean, certainly, uh, it's an attempt to repair damaged relationships, um, and really to ask for forgiveness. And and but I think that what people respond to, uh, people do, I think, respond to that uh, admission, you know, uh, because it's not like they didn't know that we had harmed them or that we were wrong, but it's pretty frustrating when someone harms you and then won't admit it and won't admit that they were wrong. So I think that's a really important piece of it in terms of that repair. Um, but so much of the repair depends upon the other person and their willingness and who they are and where they are spiritually, and we can't control that. So there's so much, that we can't control about this process that I think it makes it pretty frightening in that regard. We don't know what's going to happen. When you're doing inventory and all this internal process, there's, you know, we're kind of controlling it ourselves. Where we can go as far as we want, and we can sort of uh, manage it for ourselves. But when we, you know, talk to someone else who we've harmed, oof, um, we don't know. All right, I'll go ahead. So I talk some more about sort of the complications of making amends to my brothers, particularly. I mean, that was a big part of my amends, and so it's the experience I had that I could talk about, and how being the youngest in the family kind of put me in this certain role, and that I had expectations about them and all that stuff. So I go on and I say it's these kinds of complications that make the amends process tricky, as I saw in my first experience of the loving kindness meditation in the desert, which is an earlier piece of the book. Painful relationships and situations rarely go in just one direction. We hurt each other. Many times we have to make amends to people who have hurt us, maybe even more than we've hurt them. Being willing to stay on our own side of the street, to not get involved in what we think others might owe us, is a huge step toward clarity in our lives. What I was seeing about Michael, my brother, was that I was angry with him for something that was none of my business. Um, thinking he was supposed to live up to some image of who I thought he was going to be. Uh, because anyway, all right. Even as I struggled with all these complicated feelings about the amends, relief poured over me. Sure, I was learning about more and more messy layers of my psyche, but I was also cleaning things up. I felt a freshness, a new freedom, and sense of lightness. Unburdened of guilt, relieved of shame, I felt the possibility of a new life ahead. That is also very true. Yeah. And that's why I think, again, that the amends process comes back to something that we're doing for ourselves. We can't fix or take back the wounds that we've done for others, well done to others, and hopefully we do, though, help them in their process. Um, but certainly, it's important in our process, and just in terms of the basics of recovery, of avoiding relapse, to be able to not have this sense of guilt and shame hanging over us is really important. And it's interesting. I mean, does making amends rid us of guilt and shame. I don't know if it automatically does. I think that we have to not just engage in the actions and the process, but we have to engage in the wisdom of the steps and really um, embrace what the steps are saying, which is that we can move on and that mistakes are human and that uh, that admitting a failing um, is an act of both not of honesty clearly, but also really an act of love and um, an act of wisdom. I was talking about uh, right speech the other day and reading Bhikkhu Bodhi and how he says that honesty, speaking the truth, has this beyond its ethical importance. It has this spiritual importance, which is that if we are on a path of wisdom, if we are on a path to trying to find the ultimate truth, then we must speak the truth, because otherwise we are, going away from truth. We're going away from wisdom. So that uh, speaking the truth of our admitting our failings is is a powerful act in that regard. Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, it it's excuse me, it's step 7 that mentions humility, but clearly step 9 is the step that requires the most humility. And again, I think we have to uh, not just go through the process, but understand what the message here is. That that humility and being right-sized, that we need to be able to live in that body of humility uh, without it being a negative, without it being with without it being a burden of guilt and shame and regret. And I think for me, and I presume because the steps are designed as they are, that this is somewhat universal. The idea of admitting a failing was a huge threat to my ego, and it was not even really manageable for me until I worked the steps. And then it was, um, then I saw that it kind of flipped the whole idea and saw that there was this freedom in admitting my failings and in that humility that, I had this kind of Potemkin village of goodness. There's a strange. So the Potemkin villages are these fake cities that I think during at some point they were from Russia, and I'm not sure if there's a Soviet era, but they're like fake cities. It just had like it was like a movie set, and it would look like there was a city here. And so it was like I had this fake idea of being of some kind of perfection, that I was a good person, and and so that the fear was that if somebody saw through that, that was all going to crumble, and I was going to be seen as this bad person, right? And I think the steps are trying to take us out of those polarities and just say I'm human, and that humans are inherently flawed doesn't make them bad. Uh, and it's just very much perspective and how I look at myself, which is a, Dharma idea, right? That's right view. Right view is that I am human and not inherently imperfect, and that wisdom and mindfulness and loving kindness and compassion offer me a way to hold that truth without it being painful, to hold the truth of my imperfection in a way that's not uh, doesn't feel painful. And that comes back finally, ultimately, because the ultimate meaning of humility is not self in Buddhism, right? That this self that I'm protecting, this Potemkin, is a Potemkin village. It's a false front of something it's not real. And once I see through that, then that whole problem is removed. I mean, it's a beautiful, classic kind of Buddhist teaching that we're not going to try to fix ourselves in a kind of direct way. Oh, but rather we remove the whole idea as a construction, as a problem, and then we realize, well, the whole construction, the whole problem was built on a false premise. You know, that I exist and that I need to be protected. My ego needs to be protected. So these are kind of, to me, kind of the layers of this that we can build from the 12-step perspective and then build that into the Dharma, the ultimate Dharma perspective, which is where the spiritual awakening happens, right? Okay, well, that was something anyway. You guys get to see me in real time. I'm trying to arrive. So, and that wasn't very long, but I think I'm guessing that this is going to be a topic that will spur some discussion. So I'm going to open it up for some thoughts from you guys and to hear what you have to say. Hello, Chris.
Oh, come on.
Hey, Kevin, how's it going?
Okay.
So I have a question. I think the 9th step is interesting, and I guess the 8th step as well. And I'll say as a sidebar, I'm going through the 9th step right now, so this is very sort of topical for me. But it's this interesting world in which we're trying to connect the past, the future, and the present. You made an interesting comment that, from a dharmic perspective, the past is the past, that, we need to be living in the present and we shouldn't be having remorse about the past or worries about the future that can cause suffering. And so it's interesting because in the 9th step, we're very explicitly going back into our past. And the 8th step, we're like grudging up all these bad things that we did in the past. And now we're sort of bringing that to light. So I'm wondering if you see any conflicts there between, what the book's telling us and then what sort of Dharma might be telling us in relation to sort of bringing up the past.
Yeah. Yeah, good question, Chris, and one that definitely needs to be looked at a bit. I think the couple ways to think of it, that even though the past is gone and we can't go back, to me, the most important thing is we can't go back and relive it or fix what happened. But nonetheless, the karmic consequences of the past are very present. In fact, our present life is completely conditioned by the past. And so to ignore it is kind of naive, and taking sort of a Buddhist idea to an extreme that sort of ignores reality. Uh, um, so that's one way to look at it. And then on a more practical level, I mean, well, sort of in the practical expression of that is that we still have these potentially conflicts or relationship wounds that still need to be addressed. And it's just the point I was trying to make is that there is a certain when you do the amends, even though, as with my brother Michael, when I made amends to him, it really did restart our relationship, and it was great, and we're very close today. Um, but inside me, I still know that he had to go through that, what he had to go through, and and there's part of me that wishes that I could really fix that, right? I really appreciate that he has forgiven me and that we have been able to move on. But I still know, like, he still had to go through that, and it really was my fault. He didn't even take drugs, and I was living in his house and hanging out with the drug dealer, and for that reason, they came and arrested my brother, and he was the one who bore the penalty for that because he owned the house and he ultimately lost the house. Anyway, my favorite topic. So I hope that somewhat answers the question.
That does, especially the reminder that I guess the fact that there are karmic consequences of the past that live with us now,
Yeah.
and that we're trying to sort of address those, I guess, tie the past to the present.
Yeah.
Do you think that necessarily means that we need to make direct amends to the people, or is it okay to just accept the fact that that happened? Like, is there something particularly powerful about needing to actually talk to that person, or is it okay to just say, I messed up, like I will make amends in indirect ways?
There's definitely something powerful in making a direct amends. I mean, that's why the step is written in the way it's written. With that really vital caveat that it doesn't harm them or others, which does eliminate a lot of amends, especially with ex-partners, because usually they don't really want to hear from us. But yeah, to just be like, oh, I really wish, let me do some loving kindness practice for them. Okay, I'm good. Is kind of to avoid it, because part of this step is a training. It's a training in honesty, because step 10 is then the way we live this step in an ongoing way, that we become more honest in our lives, and we become, because there's nothing as humbling as facing the person we harmed and admitting we're wrong. It's just, there's nothing that can replace that. Sorry.
Thanks for that reminder. Appreciate
You
it,
could
Kevin.
try to find another sponsor who will tell you it's okay, but yeah. I see a hand up. Denise from the UK.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Hello, Kevin. I'll just introduce myself. I have been, I think I did a couple of meetings a few months ago, but then another commitment got in the way on a Tuesday evening. I am a fan of your books. And I'm currently reading, my brain's gone, A Burning Desire. Yeah, I'm revisiting A Burning Desire and finding it very interesting in a different way. But I did, going to amends, I did find that generally speaking, if I had the willingness, the opportunities to make amends to those people presented itself, rather than me going hell-bent to go and make amends to people and upset them in the process. You know? And it was really amazing how these. I mean, sometimes it took a few years before these people came back into my life, or you know, I accidentally bumped into them. But yeah, but it's funny. This week I've had a good example of this. I resigned from a post on Thursday, and quite in anger, I must say. I resigned in anger, and one of the other directors didn't contact me or speak to me, or it sounds. And by Sunday evening, I was thinking to myself, you know, reflecting on my own behaviour. I was angry at this man, and reflecting on my own behaviour, I thought, have I upset him? Is he angry with me? Why is he not acknowledged this resignation? So I sent him an email on Sunday night, and on Monday morning he came back to me and said, no, I'm not upset. I've been working 16-hour days. I've just not had time to think about it. And you are overthinking it, you know. And it had completely passed him by. He just had been too busy to acknowledge what had happened. And in a way that showed me, one of my, the aspects of my personality when I was drinking was that everything was my fault. I took responsibility for everything, you know. And this was a good example, really, that, you know, it's very self-centered, that, you know, I'm thinking I've upset this man and I haven't upset him at all. Anyway, just like to thank you for these classes, and I'm so pleased now I've resigned, I can attend, you know, on a weekly basis. So thank you very much. I've been listening to you, you know, online. I've been keeping up with you online. It is evening time here. It's now Tuesday evening, 10 to 7. So I can't do the Friday one because it's the wrong time.
Yeah.
Okay, middle of the night for me. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. And first of all, yes, one of the reasons I have this class where it's morning in California is so that people in Ireland and the UK and Europe can join us. So I'm glad you're here. I think it's a really interesting sort of take and twist on amends, how another type of, you know, whereas some people don't want to take responsibility for anything, the other extreme is taking responsibility for everything. And you know, maybe that falls into some kind of codependence or whatever, but it's just you know, yeah, just another version, right? It's just another kind of self-centeredness, and one that, you know, has to be examined. And I think this is, I wonder if there's some gender element to that. You know, there's certainly been some good thinking around how sort of masculine the 12-step program is, and you know, that, and Bill Wilson sort of designing it almost around his own personality, and so I think there are some holes like that don't maybe we don't see in the sort of bias of the steps. Because I've also felt that the very strong emphasis on inventory can be really harmful for the same reason, for people who take on a lot, and already are very self-critical, that you know, okay, now I'm going to write an inventory every day about how bad I am, which is, of course, not what inventory is really supposed to be saying, but it's not hard to see how we can interpret it or understand it in that way. So I appreciate that other take on it, just that different perspective. Thank you. Jonathan says, my inventories can get to be pretty abusive. Never really thought much of it. Yeah. Right. Thank you. Jane, were you going to say something before? I had a feeling you were going to say something. It wasn't just a feeling, but can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Many years ago, when I was in I had a great sponsor. I had my, amends list, and there was a woman in the company that I worked for that I went to, and I knew I couldn't remember because I was drinking, but I knew I had to say I was sorry. I knew I had to say something. I might have been flirting with her son at a birthday party or a Christmas party. I don't know. So I went to her, and she had climbed the ladder at the company, and I said, I'm here to make amends for any, I can't remember exactly what I said. It was a long time ago. And she would not tell me. She said, yes, you did do something. And she would not tell me what it was.
Ooh.
And it was so painful. I didn't know what to do with it. I had to walk away, and just say, okay, I'm sorry. And she would not tell me.
Hmm.
So, and that was many years ago. I still remember the feeling behind it. It was I sunk.
Yeah.
And I questioned myself, and there was something that we had also had fun together. So I don't know what the context was that she was coming from, but I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. You're reminding me of that terrible feeling of blackout or gray out when some behavior is lost. And I read this horrible book, the Flight Attendant. They made a TV show about it, and it's all about this blackout. I don't know why I read it. It was just like something was just passing COVID time, I guess. But it's just all about this horrible stuff that happened in a blackout, and I mean, what do you do? What can you do? It's like, I was unconscious. I've often thought about the people who wake up in prison, in jail, who don't know what they did. A lot of murders are committed in blackouts, I bet. A lot of crimes are committed in blackouts or in some kind of, and of course, car accidents. I mean, there's just, whew, yeah, boy. I mean, this is as much as, I've been away from drinking for so long, but sometimes I forget, like, it's a really serious disease, just has serious consequences. And when it's, when I see sort of these people who don't want to address the truth of alcoholism and the truth of drug addiction, and kind of want to be like, oh, well, you can have a glass of wine, it's okay. And sort of just, or even, I mean, this is the issue I have with the idea of harm reduction. It's like, yeah, harm reduction, I'm going to cut back, but then addicts tend to binge. And so you're cutting back and you're cutting back and trying to really manage it. And then you go off one night and you crash your car and you kill yourself or someone else. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of harm. And that's, and I know there's some real value in some of that harm reduction, like the needle exchange and all sorts of things. But then there's this, potential risk in it. So it's a tough disease. I certainly don't think we can ever make all the amends for everything we did, because, like, how could we? And again, I don't think that's the point. It's not. I mean, the Buddha talked about this in terms of enlightenment, that because there was this sort of idea, and you hear it still sometimes, that somehow you have to completely purify your karma in order to become enlightened. And actually, the Buddha's like, no, that's not it. That's not how it works. And clearly, the larger point is you couldn't possibly purify all your karma, just for all the reasons we've been talking about. So recovery and making amends and all of what we're doing is something other than becoming perfect or completely cleaning up our past. It's a different kind of a healing, and that's why step 9, I think, is about much more than the specifics of the amends. I think it's really important to make some specific amends if you can, mainly for me because of the transformation that happens when you actually do that. Like what happens to you, who you become when you do it. It's like, wow, that's a spiritual awakening right there. That is a huge piece of spiritual awakening. The freedom that comes. I mean, I have that phrase there that's taken from the promises, the new freedom. So it's very powerful. I wanted to mention 2 things. We have a list of people who are willing to act as, we're not calling them sponsors, but kind of, I don't know, supports for people who are, in recovery and interested in Dharma and recovery. I'll put it in the chat, unless, I don't know if Angela already put it in there, but there's a link. So if you would like to connect with somebody who's a more experienced meditator and, who might, or maybe more experienced in recovery, that page, that Google sheet, has names with email addresses and short, like a sentence or two of like who people are, what their experience is, and how. So, and if you want to add your name to that to be somebody, and this is partly, I'm going to actually wind up putting this as a link on my website. I haven't done it yet, but because people contact me and say, oh, I'm looking for like a Buddhist sponsor, and this is kind of the idea that we're trying to put forth here. I also wanted to mention that tomorrow, wait, is it tomorrow? Anyway, I'm doing something, I'm giving a talk for White Flag recovery. And she just sent me a link to it. Here it is, Kimberly Thompson. And okay, I thought she had some kind of, there's an Eventbrite link. Well, here's the Zoom anyway. Oh, here it is, Eventbrite. I guess I better click on this and then I'll take the link. Sorry for this time. Here we go. There's a little, and I think what's going to happen, so that's Wednesday, 4 p.m. California time, 7 p.m. East Coast time. And she's sort of asking me to tell my story a bit. So I think I'm going to kind of tell my story and then, connect it to Dharma and recovery. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, I don't often do that. I don't do it on here, really. So other than that, I got interviewed with 10% Happier yesterday about living kindness, one of my other books, and I will let you know when that comes out. I will be back on Friday evening, 7 p.m. Pacific time, and that will be April 30th. So that will be the last day of the month. So that's all I can tell you. Thank you all for showing up and being part of my recovery and my Dharma practice. Blessings.